and we're going to get started. We have people here in New York and people online and people at Yale, so I want to welcome all of you. First of all, my name is Peter Young. I'm the Yale class of 74. I'm pleased to welcome you to the sixth in a series of panel webinars on careers after Yale. This series focuses on trying to provide students and young alumni with candid and hopefully helpful views of different professions via panels of successful practitioners in each field. And today's profession is the legal profession. And the objective is to provide a balanced view of the profession that many Yale graduates and undergraduate students go into. And we focused on professions that have a lot of mythology and hype, both positive and negative. The careers that we covered last spring were legal and investment banking, and this fall and in January we covered medical, investment banking, and consulting. For the rest of this academic year, we're going to feature drama and film on April 3rd and entrepreneurism on April 17th. The attendance thus far has been exceptional, and the feedback from the participants has been very positive, and some representative comments anywhere from it's very, very helpful, and it's increased my commitment to go into consulting or whatever it may be, to I now realize that it's not the right thing for me, and so forth. So it's been very, very helpful for those people who have attended. We, as of 8 o'clock this morning, we had 270 people registered for today's events across the three venues. So we have quite a few people. And going forward, next academic year, we're going to cover a couple of the same main professions, such as legal, investment banking, that are so significant among Yale graduates that we have to really do it every year. But we'll also try to cover some other professions such as education, architecture, government, and nonprofit as well. So this series has been somewhat unique in that we're using three simultaneous venues. This meeting here, room here at Park Avenue, room 116 at William Harkness Hall at Yale, and a large number of people participating by streaming video and an audio conference call. One thing we did learn, by the way, is when we started streaming videos about 2 sessions ago, that we could tell who the young people are because they found streaming video to be quite convenient. However, we've had various configurations with regard to where the panelists were. The panelists are here in New York, as is true for the legal profession. Others we had split between the two. For the medical, we had 2 up at New Haven and 2 here. And others will have everyone in New Haven, so the entrepreneurism will be 100% panelists at the New Haven. But by doing it this way, essentially the students can see by video conference and ask questions. More of the alumni obviously are New York based in this area, so more alumni come to the New York series, and of course the streaming video can be viewed anywhere. In fact, I know for a fact that one of the participants by streaming video is in Shanghai because they sent us an email saying that they were getting up at 4 to watch this. So that's true dedication. So the whole idea is to make this event accessible so it's both easy for the panelists but also for the student and alumni who are actually physically located in different locations. Before I introduce the speakers, though, I'd like to just thank a number of the people and organizations whose collaboration is involved in putting these together. First, I'd like to thank Elaine Massarella and the staff of the Yale Undergraduate Career Services, Sabina Dahl of the Asian American Cultural Center, and her 2 able student assistants, Mindy Yang and Mia Nishikawa, who are both manning the sign-in lists up in New Haven, Steve Bloom and Elizabeth Rocher of AYA, Trish Takemoto, who is here, who is from the Association of Asian American Alumni Association, and Lai Lu of the Yale Association of New York. We also have STAY, the Junior Class Council, and others. And all of these organizations have contributed towards the planning, deciding what professions to feature, but also in getting the marketing of this event to the right people. I also want to give a special thanks to Kay Scholler, who has graciously provided the use of this meeting room and their video conference equipment. And as many of you know, since Kay Scholler is a well-known firm, Kay Scholler is a leading international law firm with offices worldwide, serving large and medium-sized companies. And one of our panelists, Alice Young, the chair of the Asian practice of Kay Scholler. So before I introduce the speakers, though, the real question is, why is there a need for an event like this? And to be honest, we all believe that as smart and as resourceful as Yale students and graduates are, to be honest, it's rather hard to get candid and credible information about different professions. If you think about recruiters, their job is not to help you figure out the pros and cons about being a lawyer consultant. And a lot of the resources that you have, whether it's professors and so forth, are not necessarily people who themselves have actually been practitioners. So it is our hope that this series of seminar webinars will help Yale students and alumni get candid, credible views so they can make intelligent choices about their careers. After all, if we all made our career decisions based on the current law-related television shows like Law and Order and so forth, 90% of Yale students would go into the legal profession since they solve cases in every 30 minutes and they have wonderful lighting in their offices and so forth. And that's part of the equation. So the hope here is that people go into the legal profession for the right reasons and not the wrong reasons. For today's event, first I'd like to introduce the panelists, and then as you saw in the invitation, we had 5 questions that we're going to be posing. And then I want to make sure that there's time at the end to field questions from the audience. Those of you who are here in New York, you just raise your hands. Those of you who are in New Haven, do the same. There's a microphone there where you can ask questions. And those who are participating by the webinar, you should send your questions via email to yalecareerpanels@gmail.com, and we'll be monitoring your questions on the iPad in front of me, and we'll be taking questions that you send to us. We expect to end promptly at 5:30, but the panelists have graciously agreed to stay for another 30 minutes to talk to the people here who are in New York if they have follow-up questions. As you know from your invitation, that our panelists today are Les Fagan, who is a partner at Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison; Peggy Kuo, who is general counsel of the New York City Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings; and Alice Young, who's chair of the Asia Pacific practice of Kay Scholler. And I will serve as moderators. I won't read the biographies that are already in the invitations, so I encourage you just to read those. But I think the key thing here is that all 3 of these panelists, they love what they do, they love the profession, but they also have promised to be candid and to focus on both the challenges and the joys of being in the legal profession. For after all, the legal profession, like many professions today, is going through a challenging period. The number of jobs for graduating law students has not kept pace with the number of graduates. The number of years to get to partner has increased significantly, and also fees are under pressure, as was discussed a year ago in our first legal panel. And in addition, I think those of you read the New York Times, there have been a number of articles the last couple of weeks about the decrease in the number of law school applicants. So the point here is that there are really points on both sides of the ledger, and I encourage you to develop an informed, thoughtful, and unbiased view of the profession, because after all, not only is it tragic to fail to pursue a career because of false negatives, it's also true if it's based on false positives, and really both sides can be a mistake, right? So let me, before I proceed through the 5 questions, I'd like to have each of the panelists briefly just talk about what type of law they practice and how they got into the legal profession. And maybe we can start with Peggy.
Thank you, Peter. So I think I'm a pretty good example of somebody who's improvised her career. I became a lawyer for reasons that were different from the reasons my parents wanted me to be a lawyer. My parents wanted me to be a lawyer so that I could have a little office in New Jersey and handle the wills and real estate closings for them and their friends, and live close to them. I, on the other hand, wanted to be a lawyer because I wanted to change the world. I knew Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer, I knew Clarence Darrow was a lawyer, and everyone that I admired seemed to be a lawyer. And so I had this vague notion that lawyers can change the world. So I went to law school pretty ill-informed about what the law profession was like. And when I got there, I learned very quickly that there were a lot of people who were talking about corporate law firms and this firm was better than that firm and big deals and things like that. And honestly, that didn't appeal to me very much. I still wanted to stick to my ideals about changing the world, and I ended up becoming a prosecutor, partly because I wanted to be in the courtroom. That's the Clarence Darrow part of me. And so I had not intended to go into criminal law, but that was the area that would get me into court, and so that's where I ended up. And at the time, back in the late 80s, prosecutors tended to have fairly narrow career options. But it didn't matter to me, and I thought maybe I could do that forever because I loved doing it. But then as I got deeper into the profession, I found other opportunities opening up. And I think a lot of the jobs that I've taken didn't exist at the time when I graduated law school. So, for example, I was prosecuting local crimes in Washington, D.C., and then I went to the Justice Department and was prosecuting civil rights cases. And I heard of an opportunity to go to The Hague to prosecute war crimes. I mean, what could be better, right? So at the time, I felt very free, just left everything, went to The Hague, spent 4 years and prosecuted war crimes, which was great. I moved back to New York, joined a law firm, and somehow ended up at the New York Stock Exchange as the chief hearing officer. And while I was there, something happened which I think a lot of you graduates will probably encounter in your lives. My job disappeared. And so I had to figure out what to do next. And I had thought that was a job I could stay in forever. But just completely accidentally, I learned about the job that I'm in now, which is as being the general counsel for a New York City agency. And that agency did not exist in its present form when I graduated law school, and this job didn't exist until I took it. So there were just a lot of opportunities that presented themselves, and if I had tried to script my career, I couldn't have done it. So I guess I'm here to make a pitch for flexibility and curiosity. But so just a quick thing on what I do now. My city agency provides administrative trials for other agencies. We handle everything from sanitation tickets, littering tickets, to building code violations, fire code violations, things like that. So everything other than parking tickets, basically, is how I describe it. And so we deal with a lot of the city agencies, and we get to see how municipal government runs, how City Hall interacts with the public and all these different agencies. And we think a lot about due process and what is fair and how to interact with the public, so that even if at the end of the day they do have to pay a fine, they feel that they've had a fair shake. So it's been really fun, and I'm still trying to figure out what to do with my life, so I look forward to our discussion.
Les?
Well, as I look back on it, it seems to me in retrospect that I never had a chance to do anything other than the law. My dad and all his brothers are lawyers. I grew up in a household where everybody was always talking about legal problems, so I decided to be a lawyer. But similar to what you just heard, I didn't have a clue what I was getting into. I grew up in Perry Mason and all those great movies about the courtroom, and I figured that that's what the law was really about, so I staggered into this profession in total ignorance, but I was very lucky. I managed in one way or another to attract a number of mentors in my professional career. I clerked for a federal judge who was terrific and has been a source of guidance for me over the years. I got a job at Paul Weiss and worked with some really terrific lawyers like Judge Simon Rifkin and Arthur Lyman and Ludwig Stickian, and people who were very prominent in the profession and were great mentors. And I kind of navigated through my ignorance into being a partner at Paul Weiss. And today, I'm a litigator and a trial lawyer. I handle all kinds of commercial disputes. It's a very diverse practice. I'm not incredibly specialized. I represent a lot of financial institutions, hedge funds, all kinds of people on Wall Street. but at the same time I've managed to maintain a practice in the world of fashion, motion picture companies, TV broadcasters, and so I do a lot of that kind of interesting stuff, and I represent, strangely, a number of celebrities who make life kind of interesting in the law. So I lead a very interesting and diverse professional life, and I'm a fan of the profession, and look forward to further discussion here.
Alice?
Unlike Try again. All right. Still. Should I just move it?
Sorry, we're having a mic problem. Okay. Try that.
Let's try this. Can everyone hear me?
Oh, much better.
With no reverberation. Okay. Unlike Peggy and Les, my family, my parents abhorred lawyers. They felt that lawyers were shysters. They believed that the academic profession, the scholarly profession, was the ideal profession. So when I was at Yale in the first class of women, and when I was trying to decide to do what next after college, I had talked to a number of classmates, and I was very interested in civil rights related issues, and it was during the Vietnam War, so I was sort of anti-war, and I was trying to figure out what I might do in law to change things. And so law seemed like an interesting profession for me to go into. No one in those days was interested in business school because they were the bad guys, and there were not that many public interest opportunities actually at that time. So I ended up going to Harvard for law school, and the minute I walked in the first day, decided that I hated it. I'd never known what a corporation was. I didn't know what stock certificates looked like, and everyone there seemed motivated towards the business life and getting into large law firms, which I knew nothing about either. So I struggled. I fortunately had a wonderful mentor, Professor Derek Bell, who encouraged me to stay and said that he was a civil rights activist and got me involved in the Boston Schools Committee cases during my first year of law school. And I decided that it was perhaps something that I could deal with. When I graduated from law school, I realized that I had to pay the rent, there were a lot of expenses, and that perhaps and that landlord-tenant law and a lot of the potential areas in which I could practice law on a day-to-day basis really weren't engaging a part of me that was very interested in international, because I had come from a first-generation immigrant family from Asia, spoke Asian languages, and really wished that somehow I could do something that involved a cultural bridge in a sense. So in looking around at the possibilities, I had gotten a clerkship with the Hawaii's. I was living in Hawaii at the time. My family was there, and so I'd gotten a clerkship with the Supreme Court Justice of the Hawaii Supreme Court, and that would have taken me into probably a political career in Hawaii, but really thought, I think I want to see the bigger world and what prospects there might be internationally. So I joined an international law firm called Candid Brothers, sadly defunct, but that gave me the opportunity to travel. I went to Hong Kong and then went into China in 1979 as one of the first lawyers in, did a lot of work in Japan, and found that I could use all aspects of my interest, the law that I had learned, and then the interest in cultural bridges and understanding where much of what you have to do is interpret what people are really thinking or what their business approaches are, as opposed to what the words might say, and trying to come to some sort of an understanding, which is why I really preferred, unlike what Peggy and Les did, which was more in a litigation, starting out in a litigation side, I really focused on the transactional side. And so throughout my career, I had thought that I would probably spend a couple of years in a law firm
and then go and do something else. But as it turns out, it's now been, I hate to say it, but 38 years of practicing law. And I find that every day I wake up and have something interesting and new that's going on. Because my specialization is Asia, in the old days, no one was interested in Asia, so I had the field kind of to myself. Now it's a very crowded field, but having really seen the ups and downs of China, Japan, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, all of these different countries that I had dealt with at one time or another during my practice, I realized that you could keep very fresh, because every time you open the newspapers, in the news, there's something new that's going on that changes what your advice might be, how you might approach certain issues, and it engages both the intellectual side of what those judicial systems are like in foreign countries, but also the cultural side of what the people are thinking, what they're like, and then just solving problems, which I found was the most interesting part of what I ended up doing, which is in the corporate transactional world. Basically what I was doing was trying to solve problems with people and get something done, a deal done, a project done, a venture done. And so it's turned out that I've been able to do that, plus I have a lot of interest in the pro bono arena. So I've been very active in a number of areas that involve either Asian American issues or Asia-related women's empowerment, the Asia Foundation. So I've been able to balance a lot of the type of work I do, where it all feeds into what I've learned over the years as a knowledge base, and yet keeps me really fresh and feeling that somehow I'm doing some good in the world, despite my parents' perception that lawyers are shysters.
Let's go to the next one. Thank you very much. Let's go to this next question, which is, if you step back and look at the legal profession overall, where do you think the profession is heading, both good and bad? And I think the legal profession, like most professions, I know there are good and bad things that are happening. But if each of you could maybe summarize a point or two of what you see for the profession as a whole, where is it heading, both good and bad? And should we start? Peggy, do you want to start?
Sure. Okay. Is this on? I think the legal profession has become a lot more fluid. I guess that's the one word I would use. I think it's going to be very rare for people to join one law firm or one agency and stay there for the rest of their careers. I think even if you stay put, things will change around you, like Alice was saying. The firm she joined doesn't exist anymore. And so from my experience, I see people going in and out of government a lot. And so at different points in one's career, opportunities will come up, you'll step out of that role, go into another one, and move around. So I think that's both good and bad. If you like stability, it's going to be really hard to be stable. But if you like change and you accept that challenge and consider them opportunities, that's going to be great.
Well, look, first, some basics. The legal world generates fabulous jobs. This is a profession. It has a code of ethics. It's not just a profit-oriented exercise. There's never a dull moment. Most lawyers will tell you that. Some stressful moments, but never a dull moment. It's intellectually stimulating. You can really help people preserve their liberty, preserve their fortunes, preserve their reputations. It matters. It's a really wonderful job to have. So things are going on in the profession. As Peter suggested earlier, the profession has had some rough times. There's some indications that it's bouncing back, but the profession is contracted. It's harder to get jobs. I think there's more pressure on the younger tiers of the legal profession because clients are not as interested in paying those billing rates. There are fewer jobs available at the entry level, so there's some tough times, and everybody has written about how this is more and more bottom line oriented business rather than the old style of professional organizations. But having said that, there's some good news in the trends as well. There's a flight to quality. I mean, people are looking for great service, great talent, great lawyers. That's true in every realm of the profession. The economic pressures have resulted in people deciding to go into the law who really mean it. Back when Alice and I were undergraduates, people were talking, well, I want to go to law school because I'm going to keep my options open. I can do anything. I don't think that works anymore. You want to go into law school because you want to be a lawyer, because it's harder when you get out. And I think that's happening. And the people we're seeing coming out of the law schools are sensational, dedicated, committed, smart, and they're very serious. The other good trends, I think, in the profession is there's a greater emphasis on some really important values, like lifestyle. More and more people are honoring in the profession principles of flex time. More and more people are honoring in the profession pro bono and public service. I mean, my law firm allowed me to be the CEO of a social service agency for 2 years. Nobody ever asked me why, except they wanted to make sure I was doing a good thing. That's the rule of the day in many, many parts of the profession, and I think these are good things. And last but not least, I think there's an end to excess. People are looking for valuable service, whether it's in the government sector, the pro bono sector, public service sector, or just the profit part of the law business. They're looking for, straight from the shoulder legal advice at a price that makes sense. These are, in a way, the positives of the trends that I see.
I won't repeat any of that. I agree with a lot of what's being said. But I think the legal profession is changing so quickly that it's really hard for me to predict what happens tomorrow. So to me, the best thing about a legal education is that it teaches you a way of thinking. It may not be a way that you're comfortable with, and in the end you may decide that's not the way you really operate, and you want to do things that are much more open-ended, creative in that regard. But I think it provides a flexibility where these days, I mean, most of the jobs that people coming out of college right now will have 10 years from now won't have existed even now. So I think the ability to kind of use your legal training and education to kind of think beyond the parameters of what you currently do, or what you see in law firms, or what you see in-house, what you see in businesses, it does give you, I disagree a little bit, the options to kind of try out different possibilities. And especially these days, in the old days, we would look at a resume, and if somebody was in 2 law firms, that was like, they don't stay put, that's not good. Nowadays, people who stay put for a long time, you kind of say, gee, what happened? How come they weren't able to move to something better or whatever? So I think the idea of resumes become somewhat unique. And just as colleges are now looking for people who have the passion, whatever that might be, I think also once you get into the legal profession, it's kind of deciding what your passions are and whether there are some job descriptions that are going to fit and you can survive on those passions. And if you don't have any specific passions, which frankly when I got out of college I really didn't know what I had a passion for, it was just a good time to try out a lot of different things. One of the things that I do in corporate transactional work is I have a lot of different kinds of clients. I have entrepreneurs, I have fashion, I have pharmaceutical, various types of industry sectors and personalities. And it's constantly learning and growth, because I'm learning enough about the industry to be able to give some decent advice, but I don't have to do it for the rest of my career. I can move on to the next type of project or client. So it's allowed me to be really kind of excited and learn over a long period of time, where otherwise I might frankly be kind of bored. I've read a lot of bad things in the press recently about law firms going bankrupt and business, people going to jail because of insider trading, and people who ought to know better, who are lawyers. But I think that it is kind of a changing of the old models. And so on the one hand, you can say, well, that makes it very scary. But I think it's also then an opportunity to really think a little bit out of the box about what you're really interested in doing in life and see what's out there that might kind of fit, and then try it on. And now I think there's that possibility to do it without really hurting your legal career. But something that Les said and something that Peggy kind of inferred is it is really important to learn well, to learn the law well, to really get trained. Because if you've lost that training in the earlier years, it's very hard to make it up. It's just, if you never learned division in grade school, it's really hard to get into algebra without having to work 5 times as hard. So I would say, do try earlier in the career to get some really solid training.
Well, let me be a little bit of a devil's advocate, because after a law school is 3 years, right? And a lot of people who comment that I know were lawyers said a lot of what I learned in law school wasn't applicable when I became a lawyer. And then they take the bar exam, and they definitely say that. They say, well, gee, learning about the details of divorce, rules in New York State didn't help me be a corporate finance lawyer, etc. So, but you go through a long period and so forth. So, let me play some devil's advocate. Flexibility is the thing. There are a lot of other things that it doesn't take, say, 4 or 5 years before, of initial training, right, at law school. You go to business school, that's still 2 years, right? But the argument could be, there are a lot more different careers you could pursue as business. So, I'm not saying that there aren't lots of things that open up, but being a devil's advocate, compared to other things, what makes law, pursuit of law, an advantage there relative to others? Go ahead, Les.
Well, it's a great job.
Mm-hmm.
And for many lawyers, they would tell you 3 years, of course. I didn't like law school either all that much, to be honest. But law schools have changed. They're more real world in many respects. There are a lot more clinical courses. There are a lot more simulation courses. The old Socratic method where you would stand up in class being called upon by a professor and humiliated. It's a kinder and gentler era in the law school. So I think things have improved a great deal. But yes, it's 3 years. Medical school is 4 years. Business school is 2 years. It's a commitment. And the law school professors would say it takes that long to get you to think like a lawyer. And while it may not bear a resemblance to the real world of practice, it certainly is an important developmental tool so you can practice well. For me, while I didn't love law school, I'm glad I went. It was worth the time. My parents paid the tuition. It was worth me seeing them do that. Because I think the rewards of being a lawyer are really very substantial. If you get in and find a niche and a place that you enjoy, I think it's a terrific job.
Let me ask another question, which is, what do you see as sort of the most prominent myths, plus and minus, right, about the legal profession that you sort of figured out over time, right? I mean, as an investment banker, I'll tell you there is a long list of myths, plus and minus, about being an investment banker. By the way, it used to be that the law has both a glamorous image, but also a very negative image, right, when you talk to people. Investment banking used to be that way. Now it's only a negative image, and I run an investment bank, so you have an advantage there. So what are some of the myths that you think are really important for the audience to really understand?
I think one myth is that you have to be a jerk to be a lawyer, and actually I think that works against you. I think it is a service profession, as Les said, and so people skills are really a plus. It's a necessity. On the other hand, it's true. If you ask people, who do you hate most, they'd be like lawyers, and who do you like most? It's like my lawyer. So there is something about that strength of advocacy, and that's frankly one of the things that attracted me to the law as well. So that's one thing. Can I go back for a second to your law school idea?
Go ahead.
Question. So thing about law school, I wouldn't agree or disagree about whether it should be 3 years, but I think it's a little bit like the liberal education that you're all getting at Yale as an undergrad, that you learn areas of law that you're not sure you're going to practice, but you're interested in it, and somewhere in the back of your brain it's been planted, so later on in life it kind of pops up again. I took administrative law in law school. I found it interesting vaguely, and didn't practice it until I came to my current job. So they're just these things that law school is an opportunity to really explore different parts of the law. And I think if we think of it only as studying to take the bar exam, you're going to lose a lot. And the other thing I learned in law school, which I didn't understand at the time, is that we were asked not only what the law is, but what it can be. And so the professors would say, well, do you think it should be that way? And I'd be like, well, it is, so why are you asking me that question? But I think over time, I've realized that a lot of those questions are very wise, because the law has changed. And sometimes I am asked, how do you think the law should be? And I can change the law. And so if I didn't have to practice in thinking about what the possibilities are, I wouldn't have that kind of brain exercise, that muscle memory of asking those questions. So I think that law school, thankfully, is less of a hazing as it was back then. You know, I really felt like it was 3 years of them trying to dissuade me from becoming a lawyer and joining that fraternity. But I think now, especially law schools, are learning that they do have to provide useful things for students, not just for their first job, but for the rest of their careers. And it's the first opportunity for students to really write their stories, you know, because I interview a lot of students for jobs, for summer internships, and already the ones who are clever, or at least smart about it, have already taken on internships, done summer jobs, done extracurricular activities that define who they are and who they want to be. And that counts for a lot. So, you know, you start to define yourself in law school, and that really carries through the rest of your career.
Alice?
And Peter, to answer your question, I think that business school graduates can't become lawyers, but lawyers can go into business, can become judges, can go into not-for-profit. Business school grads can also go into not-for-profits. But I think it does still, even now, provide an array of options for that one extra year that, as Peggy says, is kind of part of the liberal arts practice of law. So I still think that it was worth the 3 years. Maybe it would have sufficed to have 2, but I do think that it does provide a platform where you can basically write your own script.
One comment I'd like to make, just generally, observations from these seminars that we've had, panels, is I was strongly encouraged, because this has come out in many of these panels, that the best way, one of the better ways to find out what's true or not, is find someone who you know, who knows you, but is in that profession, who knows you enough to know what you're like and not like, but they know they can give you a candid view from being a lawyer or an investment banker or whatever it is. You know, there are a lot of ways to get to the right place in terms of knowledge about what's the right career. But I would encourage not only things like this, but in this case, they can tell you candidly what it's like, but they don't know you. So I would suggest you also try to find ways in which people who are in the profession, who also know something about you, can give you some advice. The next question is straightforward. All professions are not meant for everyone, and it's a combination of a lot of things. It's not just skills, but it's lifestyle fits and so forth. What do you see are the characteristics of people who tend to do well in the legal profession, but also who tend to be happy in the profession? By the way, those two things don't always go together. I mean, there are people who are terrific and unhappy, and there are people who, I guess, are not so good but happy for whatever reason. But that's not necessarily 100% correlated. So you've certainly seen so many people come through the profession, you know, as practicing lawyers. Any comments on the kind of people who tend to do well, what are their characteristics, but also the ones who tend to end up happy?
Should I start? It's a tough question, in part for the reasons that Alice was describing. This is such an enormously spacious profession, there are so many different pieces of it, and each piece requires different talents and skills. I mean, there are different kinds of employers, government, public service, pro bono, commercial, political. There are many different ways of being a lawyer. And on top of that, even when you find a job, there are different disciplines in the law. Being a litigator is about as different as you can imagine from, say, being a tax lawyer or a trust and estates lawyer. So it's not a unidimensional job, and therefore to say which skills work and which don't, and which make you happy and which don't, is kind of challenging. But if you had to say, if you had to generalize, obviously you need some intellect, you need some drive, you need some ambition, you need to enjoy some high performance kinds of jobs that are out there. And maybe most of all, you have to understand that no matter whether you're in government or in a corporation or in a law firm, this is a personal service business. And people are looking to you, depending upon you, to react, to give them good advice, to be responsive, to be quick about being responsive. You got to love that. You've got to enjoy being not only the lawyer but also the counselor. And you have to understand that somebody's out there really depending upon you to come up with the right answer and guide them in the right way. If you're resentful of that kind of pressure and that kind of need of people who are typically in trouble or have a problem and need to do something, if you can't manage that, my guess is you're not going to be happy or successful.
Certainly that's the case that in the service business, although not all aspects of the law share this characteristic, your ability to control all 24 hours of your life and your weekends is pretty low. I mean, I'm in investment banking, and it's a service business, the same thing. You can't say, well, it's the weekend, and so I'm not going to accept any calls. If you can live with that, then you lose loss of that freedom, then you're fine. But if you can't, and you feel very strongly the other way, it's just not the right profession. You were there. Peggy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I guess I would just put a slight gloss on that, because the legal profession, as you've heard today, is so broad and varied that pretty much anybody can find a niche in it. And if you don't like to be a counselor and you want to find a small corner of an office to delve through the tax code, there probably is a job where you can do that. So
You need a cave.
Yes, exactly, a cave. But I think the most important thing is actually somebody who has his or her eyes wide open. So and that includes a lot of self-knowledge about who you are, what you like, what your values are, what kind of culture you thrive in, and a lot of that will entail some experimenting throughout your career, because you might think you like that and you get there and you don't like it, but it's really usually a question of fit. So if you're a very extroverted person and somebody gives you the tax code to sit in a corner, you're going to hate it. But if you are somebody who likes quiet, wants to just write a lot of appeals briefs and review emails, or and find satisfaction in that, then that's fine. And there are other people who do like the interaction, who do like the high-powered kind of work, who like the pressure, who like getting on an airplane, getting off the traveling across the world, getting off the airplane and going straight to a meeting. They thrive on that adrenaline. That's going to work for you. If your values fit with the culture of where you're working, that will be happy for you. If it's not, then it's going to be miserable. If you've joined a company where there's a lot of emphasis on public service and you just want to make money, then that's not going to be a good fit. So I think really everybody can find something, but it's your job to find that fit and to be honest about whether it's working or not.
Let me ask a question that's not on the list, but is a valid question. Two of our panels here are women, and certainly in investment banking, it took a long time before a woman had any percentage of employment, much less senior positions. Any comment about what it's like to be a woman, and if someone's entering today, what they should, think of in terms of going in with their eyes open? We had this question when we had the medical one, and the woman who was a doctor said, look, I love being a doctor, I don't regret it, but let me tell you, you know what you have to make sure you know. And her comments were extremely helpful. So any comments that you can give to this audience, which is clearly, at least here and up in New Haven, a mixture of men and women?
Well, having been in the first class of women at Yale, I was kind of used to having to deal with people wondering what the heck you were doing there, and there was both positive and negative to being first. And then when I went to Harvard for law school, it was the first class that had 10% women, which now seems laughable, but in those days was, you know, to be double digit. To have 56 out of 560 was amazing. I think there were 3 Asian Americans as well, which was, you know, just goes to show times have really changed. But what I do find over the years, it's become easier and tougher for women. The tougher piece is that law firms, for example, and in-house and whatnot, it takes longer to become a partner, let's say, in a law firm. When I was going through the process, I was very lucky and became a partner within 6 years. That is unheard of these days. It's now more like 12 years for law firms. So for women who are thinking of perhaps having a family, trying to figure out how that all fits into the career, I think has become much more difficult, and that's true of law firms, it's true of in-house positions. A little bit different in not-for-profits, political office, business, where we have, you know, Marissa with, you know, having a kid while suddenly when becoming president of Yahoo. I mean, everything is possible. But I think it really depends a lot on one's own drive and energy level and what one thinks is important in life. I mean, to me, I was fortunate in that either fortunate or forced to kind of find my own clients and career path, because Asia just wasn't a very popular arena in those days. So as a result, I could, in a sense, pick and choose clients and could work out things so that I had some flexibility, or at least felt that even though I was working 24/7, that it was for a goal for people that I cared about, for companies that I was interested in. But I also firmly believed that it was important to have friendships, to have family, and so I really had to work very hard to try to do it all. And frankly, I think it's not so easy for women to have it all. I think balance is, it just depends on what day you're talking about. There really isn't a balance as such. But it is possible if you have a fair amount of energy and you have people around you, whether it's a significant other or family or friends or whatever, who are very supportive, it is possible to maintain some kind of balance in having both a career and a personal life. And I think that's really, really important, because at the end of the day, the work is very gratifying, but having a sense of belonging in a larger community, whether that's a not-for-profit community or family or whatever, I think is important, and each person is different. In some ways, it's become easier for women because with Title IX, there's a sense that, you know, well, of course we should be part of it. Of course we should be able to make certain kinds of decisions. Of course people should accommodate certain things, and we'll accommodate others. So I think there's a new kind of approach to things, and a lot of businesses are much more flexible. You're talking about telecommuting, flexible time, internet businesses where you don't really have to sit at a desk in a particular place day in, day out. So I think there's a lot more flexibility these days, and you can deal with how you want your career. But it really has, I think for women, it's much more of an effort to think. You have to think about it. It's not something that's automatic.
Peggy, any comments?
It's always hard to answer the question what it's like to be a woman in the legal profession, because I don't know what it's like to be a man. So all I can say, I mean, I know, speaking to women who were in the first class at Harvard Law School, that when they got there, it was really horrible. You know, they didn't have a women's room, so in the middle of the
It was in the
exam.
basement.
Yeah, it was in the basement. There was only one in the whole campus. They had to run across campus if they had to go to the bathroom. You know, just stupid stuff like that. And of course, that doesn't happen anymore. And things are progressing. Now our second dean of Harvard Law School, who's a woman, and we have Supreme Court justices for women, and so it seems like the sky's the limit for women in the profession. And I think it's really, a lot of the issues that Alice is talking about with balance applies to men as well as women, because men want to have families too, men want to spend time with their loved ones and pursue other interests. And so the fact that there is more flexibility in the profession and people are bringing up these issues, I think is all good. But I do also want to, because when that question is asked, I'm always a little bit uneasy. I know right now there's this discussion about leaning into your career, about women kind of taking a step back and saying, well, I want to have children in 10 years, so what should I do now? Should I take a job that's less competitive or less stressful in preparation for that? And I don't really know if that's the best approach. I mean, I think everyone's careers will change over time, and so you should pick the career, you should pick the job or the position that you're interested in at that moment. And then when things change, you can change that situation and switch to something else. But I think to take something that you're only lukewarm about because you think you might need balance isn't going to lead to happiness, because I think happiness is engagement. And if you're really engaged in that thing at that moment, then I think eventually things will work out. Having said that, I do want to tell folks that I don't have children, and I think that part of it is because I've moved around so much. I've lived overseas, I've been in different cities, and so that is something that you have to think about. But on the other hand, I think the idea of being married at an early age wasn't appealing to me, and the idea of having children wasn't appealing to me, and so it's just how you live your life and the decisions you make throughout.
Now, we have one other question, but given that now I want to make sure that there's time for questions from the audience, and so we have about 6 minutes before. So what I'd like to do is, by the way, I've been looking at my iPad because we've been having a flurry of questions and comments from people, and a few from people who say, I'm stuck, I can't get to the Yale location, and so forth. I apologize. So what I'd like to do is open it up to questions. And I think one of the challenges we have is that the screens are not visible to the panelists. But I would like to start by asking anyone who's at Yale whether they have any questions. We'll start with them. And if anyone has a question, they can come up to the mic, identify themselves, and just ask the question. And you can direct your question either to the group as a whole or to a specific person. We cannot hear you. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Hi. My name is Liz Dayubal, and I'm a freshman here at Yale. I'm just wondering. I guess this question is directed to Ms. Young. I know that you focus on Asian relations, and I'm just wondering. You said that now there's a lot more people in that area. Do you think it's still wise to go into law with a focus on Asia?
It's a great question. I think you ought to do it if you think it's really cool. If you really enjoy it, if there's something about Asia that attracts you, then do it. If, however, you think that that's going to be the hot area and that therefore you should do it, I urge you not to, because it is a crowded field. There are a lot of people that are going into it. And so it's not going to be as easy, not that it was so easy for me back then, but it's going to be, I think there's going to be more competition for any particular opportunities or jobs. But if you have a passion for it, or if you're excited by it, or you just think it's going to be interesting, then go for it, try it. the worst that can happen is that you have on your resume that you went to Shanghai for a year, or you were in Tokyo, or it's not the worst thing in the world. So I think it's really more a question of, is there something else that interests you more, in which case go for that. And in my case, I always kind of had my feet in two different areas, because having parents who were sort of immigrant parents and sort of depression mentality in a certain way was always, make sure you can feed yourself. So I always did some things that I was really interested in, but then kept training in something else. So I kept my hand in corporate transactional, I did some bank finance, I was sort of watching out for just the plain vanilla kind of work in addition to the Asia work. So whenever the Asia work came in, I was ecstatic I got to do that, but then kept on the skills of just sort of general transactional corporate work. So that's what, I'm sorry I can't face you and talk into the mic at the same time, but that would be my advice. Try it if it seems really exciting to you. It certainly will not be a bad experience, but if there are other things that intrigue you more, and this is just because it's a job opportunity, I wouldn't do it. I mean, frankly, in the old days, people would go into certain areas. Now I have people who come to interview with me and say, I really want to do Asia law and bankruptcy, and I'm going, okay, hot area right now in law practice. But they probably aren't really just crazy about bankruptcy. So I would be careful about just going to the next hot thing. Try to ground yourself in things you found interesting, combined with what seems exciting out there.
We have two questions that just came in from the people who are watching the webinar. I'm going to explain both of them, and then the panelists can choose which one or both to answer. The first was different, and this is from John. He says, his question is it true that there's some very distinctly different firm cultures among the different law firms? And to what extent is that important in thinking about a career? The second one is totally different, which is from Kate, who says, I realize that none of you have direct experience in JAG, but do you have any thoughts on working as a military lawyer? Perhaps you have a friend or colleague who was in JAG. So they're not intertwining questions, but if either any of the three of you have a comment about either of those two questions.
Should I start? You're absolutely right. These law firms, John, have extremely different cultures and personalities, which are sculpted by their history, personalities in the firm, the personalities of their clients, and they are as different from one another as you can imagine. And yes, it is a very important factor in deciding, what to do in this profession. There's a huge series of choices, and you can make decisions based on a wide variety of options as to which kind of culture appeals to you. My own view is culture is really important. The best people come for ideas, not money. And so if you want to work at a great place, it could be a small place, it could be a big place, it could be a government place, it could be a pro bono, whatever. I think it's important to define what that culture is to the extent you can determine it from the outside and see if it fits. But it certainly shouldn't be a disincentive to go into the law. There's so many choices. Once you get out of law school, you could probably find what fits for you. I'm not going to touch the JAG question.
You want to do the JAG?
Okay, here we go.
Okay. I absolutely agree. There's so many different types of law firms, and depending on whether they're more litigation oriented, more corporate transactional oriented, or do both, there are also tremendous personalities that are based on the history and the culture, and you can pretty much figure it out by just talking to people, preferably the younger people in the firms, because they have a much better feel for what's really going on. The partners will tend to just be much more diplomatic about how they describe their firms, and obviously, since they've been there a long time, are going to be positive about it. But I think it's important to keep very up to date, because firms are, Dewey's here today, gone tomorrow. There are lots of things underlying firms that it's hard to understand or hard to figure out from the outside, but you can get a little bit of a sense of it if you talk to people who are, let's say, 3 or 4 years in to those firms. So I would really check that aspect of it out. I've been at 4 different firms, completely different. It's kind of like choosing colleges in certain ways. Do you want a large school? Do you want a small one? Urban environment, collegial, kind of rolling campus? They do have different personalities. With respect to JAG, I do know people who have gone through the program, and it's a pretty big commitment. So you have to decide early on that you really want to do it and are committed to it. The ones that I know who went through the program thought it was absolutely fantastic. It also paid their way, which really was a much better, financially it was a big issue, and so that was a big incentive as well. Very interesting cases, so I think it's definitely something worth looking into, but exploring really carefully before you get into it.
But not every day is like NCIS, right?
Right, exactly.
Just on the JAG question, I think it is well respected. So in terms of once you're in it, and you want, if you're thinking about career options afterwards, I knew a lot of people who went to the Justice Department, for example, who had a JAG background. If we see that on the resumes, that indicates they've had a lot of really good training and a lot of good litigation experience. So that's a good thing.
Any questions here in New York that we can get? Okay, hold on. Why don't you come up and get the microphone? Or I'll bring it over to you. Hold on.
Hi, thank you first of all for the panelists. My name is Rebecca Trupin, and I graduated in 2011. And I'm wondering about international experience and how to balance that with careers in law. How possible it is to practice in multiple countries, if one doesn't necessarily want to do international law, just sort of what flexibility one has, or even say within the United States, to live in different states, and whether that's changing and how you see it changing, what the options are there. Thank you.
Anyone on the panel?
I think these days there are many, many more opportunities in international law, and you can do it from different locations. Now, it used to be you had to be in New York, or then later on in, say, San Francisco, Los Angeles, or DC, and there were very few firms that had international offices. Now, most of the really big law firms have offices all around the world. So I think, and in the old days also, if they had an international office, it was very, very small. So the good news was that you got a lot of training in all kinds of things. The bad news was that you didn't have a whole lot of experts in the office that you could look to help you with that training. So but nowadays, most of the international law firms have very big offices in those jurisdictions. So I would say you really have a lot of options these days if you're really interested in the area. If you want to keep one foot in each door of opportunity, then I would say probably stay, initially in a U.S. firm in some of the major cities that tend to have more international law. And things have changed. I mean, for example, Chicago, Cleveland, I wouldn't have, thought 20, 30 years ago was a place that you might get some international law, but because the Midwest has so many deals that involve Asia, for example, in Europe, there's more and more of that. So I think the opportunity is actually much greater now, and so if you're interested in it, if you can get a taste of it at a place that you go to, but at the same time keep up with whatever the transactional side, whatever the legal career track is as such, I think you'll be able to then decide whether that's something that you really like. It's not as glamorous as people think. I mean, I spent half of my legal career on airplanes, and after a while, just the the flights get longer and longer, and you get more and more tired. It's not so clever. I mean, you spend most of your time in the hotel room or in the conference room with no windows negotiating, so it's not as glamorous as one would think. On the other hand, I just find that learning about new ways of thinking, new approaches, different countries' approaches just keeps me really going and fascinated.
It also depends on what you mean by international law. If it just means living overseas and working someplace, then there are opportunities, to be an American lawyer with an office that happens to be in Shanghai or in London. And remember, there's also international public law. So where I was working in The Hague, we were doing pure international criminal law. So that was a very specific area of law. So, and then there are opportunities to learn comparative law. So, for example, there are ABA committees that will send American lawyers to developing countries and talk about American law and kind of do an exchange program with them and help them build up their judicial system. So there is, like Alice said, there are a lot of opportunities. It's just international law is very, they're sort of diversified. So it really depends. Or you could just end up being on airplanes a lot, going, to visit your client who happens to be headquartered in Frankfurt, and then turn around and get out and come back and never see anything of that country. So there's, you really have to just explore.
Just a footnote, because these folks have a far more experience than I do in that world, but I'm a New York-based lawyer, and I am licensed to practice in New York, and I'm supposed to be licensed to go to the courts of the state of New York. I'm spending 40% of my time in other countries because the profession now is so global. When I first started practicing law, I went up and back to the courts downtown. Now I'm in South Africa, and I'm in Japan, and I'm in China on disputes that could be resolved through mediation, international arbitration. So the practice has become more and more global in its nature, at least in some sectors of the bar, and therefore even if you are a New York-based lawyer, you'll find yourself on foreign soil.
We're gonna let one last question from the lady over there. So if you can ask your question directed to the panelist or to the panel as a whole.
Hi, my name is Jessica, and I graduated from Yale in 2010. I was really pleased to hear the level of flexibility that exists within the profession. It sounds like you've all kind of jumped from one sector to the other, and I'd like to hear a little bit more detail about what those first couple of transitions were like for you, going from litigation to entertainment or to human rights. We can talk about that.
Who's first?
My jumping around was I started out at Candid Brothers, a law firm, and then I went to the Hong Kong office, and then out of the Hong Kong office I was doing deals throughout Asia, and then came back to New York. So my base was always New York. I then had the opportunity very early on to open the New York office for a California law firm that did a lot of work internationally. So I founded and started from scratch, which was a unique experience. And that was really through a series of kind of lucky happenstance situations. But I think that the whole time that I was doing that, I was also very involved in a lot of not-for-profit organizations like the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and Aspen Institute, various organizations that were really shifting, changing what the rights were. They were really trying to advocate on causes that I thought were really important. So I always had my fingers in a lot of different arenas, and so it always felt like a wonderful, stressful mix, but a wonderful mix of using all aspects of my brain and my legal skills. I then moved to I had a first child and then a second. I was about to have a second child, and I found that running an office, being the client development person, being the person who's actually doing the legal work as well. And flying back and forth to San Francisco, I was on the managing committee every month, was an amazing stress. And with the second child coming, decided maybe this was just a little bit too much. And so then joined a firm which was very different in approach, had a lot of resources. Its main office was in New York. And that's something to think about, headquarters versus subsidiary offices. And then decided that I wanted to deal with a diversity of clients that were mostly what I was doing was banking finance related at that large New York firm. And so came to Kay Scholler, which had, as well as the big deals, also had the middle market deals and the entrepreneurs, where I felt I could really have a much more intimate kind of client relationship. I could really work with clients and not worry so much about using 10 associates on a deal and kind of being more of a money machine. And so that's kind of how I segued from place to place. It was really so that my clients could be best served. But I've always then also maintained the pro bono work that I do. So I always feel a tremendous sense of satisfaction that I'm doing well, but I'm also doing good.
So, your questions about transitions. I've had a lot of transitions, and I think the trick to transitions is to take what you have and parlay it into what you want. And so it really entails a lot of persuasion of the new employer, prospective employer, to let them take a chance on you when you've never done that thing before. But you can't do it just to say, well, just, you take a chance on me. You want to make sure that you've made clear what your skills are. You also want to make clear that you've done something, whether through your voluntary bar association work or pro bono work or some other thing that indicates you're interested and have a little bit of experience in that area, and show them how you can parlay what you've done into this new thing. And so for me, I started out as a prosecutor of local crimes. I went to be a prosecutor of civil rights crimes nationwide, so that wasn't so much of a stretch. Going to The Hague, again, wasn't so much of a stretch because now I'm doing international. But when I came back and I made the switch from public sector to private sector, that was a little bit more of a stretch. And a lot of firms wouldn't take a risk on me. And the firm that did WilmerHale saw that I had a lot of litigation experience, and at that time there was a lot of securities regulation work that was being generated, and so they hired me for that. Now, once I was in that world, I had securities regulation, which I never had before, and so when the New York Stock Exchange was looking for someone, suddenly I became a viable person for that. And then once I was in the New York Stock Exchange doing administrative trials, then coming to my present position was less of a stretch. But if you went from prosecuting local crimes to war crimes to sanitation tickets, kind of go, what? How did that work? But at each point, there's something that segues into the next one. So that's the trick for you. And also, I think it shows how important it is to be doing things outside your job. Because if you're doing only your job, then you're only doing the thing that you're doing, and you're not doing things that would indicate what your aspirations are. So if you're interested in environmental law, let's say, and you're not doing it, you can join a bar committee that does environmental law. And suddenly you've met a lot of people there, and it's on your resume, and you've developed a little bit of expertise in that area.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the panelists, who I think have done a wonderful job of answering the questions, but also answering your questions. And please join me in thanking them. I want to thank very much. I think this has been wonderful. I also want to say that I think what they've said has been very helpful. I think for those of you hopefully thinking about whether to pursue a career or if you are to understand it better. But I would strongly encourage you to do something that they can't help you, which is to be honest about yourself and really have a very, very candid understanding of yourself and what you're really good at or not good at. And IQ is not correlated with honesty about yourself. In fact, often it can be the other way around. So I strongly encourage you to find your own way to give a candid view of yourself, right, as part of this process. To end, I encourage those of you who want to be in drama and film. We have April 3rd, and the Entrepreneurism is on April 17th. And perhaps we'll see some of you there as well. Right? So thank you very much, and thank all the panelists.